Good morning, everybody. I just want to begin today with another shout out of condolence to some really good friends of mine. They are the Hensons who live in New Zealand. Dave and Annalie, just so sorry about the passing of your dad. And we just know what a special man he was. I personally had the privilege of just knowing him ever so slightly. But everything you said in the funeral last night, or in your 12 o'clock your time, 12 o'clock midnight our time, was totally true. What a great man, and our condolences to you as a family. We'll be in touch. But we're talking about what it means to commune with God. We're looking at the two guys on the road to Emmaus whose hearts were warmed deeply when they met with Jesus on the road. At first they didn't understand who he was. They had to have the scriptures open to them. But communion with God began for them, as it does with us, with having the right concept of who God is. Their concept of God was straightened out very quickly with Jesus explaining the Bible to them, talking about the prophets and the things that were going to come, and almost in a sense saying, guys, didn't you get this? Didn't you understand this, that this is what I was saying all along? And these guys' hearts were warm, not because Jesus revved them, but because Jesus clarified to them about who he was. In order for communion to happen, we have to have the right concept of who God is. But here's another C that comes out of communion now. Out of communion comes the calling of God. When you really get to know God well, then the calling of God is not a difficult thing to understand or to receive. When you understand God well and you kind of know him personally and are embracing fellowship with him, not in perfect circumstances, because that seldom happens, but in the midst of the fire and in the midst of the wilderness and in the midst of the tragedies of life, very often God draws close to issue to you a calling. In the midst of the storm, God called Peter out. That happens not in the beauty of daylight and the wonder of nice circumstances. In the midst of the storm, Peter received a calling to get out of the boat. In the place of the wilderness, when Moses was walking through the wilderness and lived there for 40 years as a shepherd after having messed up in Egypt, and now all he had was he, his sheep, and God. And he learned, I'm sure, although he must have been a little confused, I guess, he must have learned what it meant to commune with God, because that's all that he had. It happened in the midst of the wilderness. We see so often this calling of God happening at a time of deep communion with him. And sometimes our greatest communion happens at the point of our greatest crisis. Now, I want to suggest to you, for those of you who have become married, when you gave your wife the call to be your wife, guys, did it happen at a rugby game in front of everybody? Did you get done? It's unlikely. You have these dramatic moments sometimes where a guy offers his wife the calling to become his wife in the midst of a rugby game. Not generally. Most time, the calling to be somebody's life partner happens in a candlelit dinner, somewhere where there's deep, sensitive emotion, and a time of great compassion and communion is deep, and it's romantic, and it's all that stuff. And you're saying, Trevor, were you ever like that? No, probably not that much, but yeah, certainly I was. I certainly didn't ask Colleen to marry me at a rugby game or sitting watching WWF wrestling. Didn't do that. I asked Helene to marry me in a time of just us alone, of a time when it was just a deep and a meaningful experience. And I guess when we commune with God in a similar way, but on a scale far bigger, that's where God issues to us our calling. When we're sensitive to hearing the voice of God, sensitive to hearing it's not an audible voice, but the hearing the wonder of that deep sort of inward groaning that happens, and you just know that you know that you know that God is saying something to you. Doesn't happen in the midst of busyness and running around. Take time, people, to spend time communing with God, talking to him about the deeper things of life, talking to him about the things at the end of the day that really matter, and watch what happens. Your heart begins to burn and gets warmed just like theirs. And in that context, the voice of God and your calling probably will happen so much better than anywhere else. I hope that be your experience. I don't want to sound overly simplistic and naive, but I got to tell you, my experience, that seems to be the truth. Certainly, in the midst of what the Bible talks about here, the calling comes from the point of communion, getting to know God better. The point of knowing the concept of God is accurate and hearing the voice of God at that time. If you haven't sensed the calling of God, spend some time with Him. Take that amazing book and say, God, I'm not leaving this place until you speak to me. Get into a deeper place of prayer with Him and watch what God does and what He says to you. Hope you have a good day. I will see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.